I thought my family just wanted to steal my grandfather's house, but I was wrong. They wanted to steal my future too. They filed a complaint with the state bar accusing me of practicing law illegally, expecting me to panic and apologize. However, they did not know that someone in the disciplinary room had already read my file and was simply waiting for them to walk into their own trap. My name is Madeline Clark, though the only person who said it with any genuine affection was the man we buried 3 weeks ago. At 29 years old, I had spent the better part of my life trying to shrink myself down to a size that would fit into my family's narrow definition of convenient. But standing here in the drafting hallway of my grandfather's cottage in Waverly Point, Oregon, I felt a strange, terrifying expansion in my chest. It was the feeling of taking up space that nobody wanted me to have. The house was not a mansion. It was a weathered, single-story craftsman structure that smelled permanently of cedar, sea salt, and the loose-leaf tobacco my grandfather used to smoke in his pipe before the doctors told him to quit. The floors creaked in a language I had memorized during the summers of my childhood, the only season where I was not just Diane's daughter or Sloane's older sister, but simply Maddie. Now, the fog rolling off the Pacific Ocean seemed to wrap the house in a shroud, isolating me from the rest of the world. I was supposed to be here to grieve, to sort through boxes of paperwork, and to figure out how to pay the property taxes, but my family saw this period of mourning differently. To them, I was not a granddaughter saying goodbye. I was a squatter and an asset they were eager to liquidate. I worked as a legal assistant at Stonebridge Compliance Group. It was not the high-flying attorney role my mother used to dream of for me before she realized I was too quiet for courtrooms. But it was a job that required precision. I spent 40 hours a week reading the fine print, noticing where signatures did not match, where dates were off by a single day, and where language was used to obscure the truth rather than reveal it. I was good at it because I had spent a lifetime decoding the passive-aggressive dialect of my own home. The phone on the kitchen counter buzzed. It was my mother, Diane. I watched the screen light up, taking a sip of cold coffee before answering. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Maddie, honey, I called 3 times. The service out there is dreadful," she said. There was no pause for an answer. "Calvin and I were just looking over the county assessments. Did you know the property tax in Waverly Point went up by nearly 12% this year? That is a massive burden for a single girl." She did not ask how I was sleeping. She did not ask if I missed him. She went straight to the ledger. "I have the savings. Mom, I can handle the taxes for now." "For now," she echoed, her voice dropping into that concerned register she used when she wanted to undermine my confidence. "But what about the roof?" Sloane mentioned she saw some rot near the gutters when we were there for the wake. "Replacing a roof can cost $15,000, maybe 20. You don't have that kind of liquidity. Maddie, none of us want to see you drown in debt trying to hold on to a nostalgic relic." "It is not a relic. It is a house," I said, my grip tightening on the mug. "And the roof is fine. I had a contractor look at it on Tuesday." There was a silence on the other end, sharp and cold. I had stepped out of the script. I was supposed to be overwhelmed. I was supposed to ask for help. "We are just worried about you," she said finally, the warmth returning but not quite reaching her eyes, even over the phone. "You know how you get when you take on too much. You shut down. We just want to make sure the transition is smooth." Transition, that was the word of the week. Not inheritance, transition, as if the house was already moving away from me. The attacks were not always this direct. Sometimes, they came in the form of a blonde, 5'7" whirlwind named Sloane. My younger sister arrived 2 days later, her BMW crunching loudly over the gravel driveway. She did not call ahead. Sloane never called ahead because she operated under the assumption that her presence was a gift that required no RSVP. She walked in while I was sorting through a box of grandfather's old journals in the living room. She was wearing a beige trench coat that probably cost more than my car, and she looked around the room with the critical eye of an interior designer, which she was not, though she played one on Instagram. "God, it smells like old paper in here," Sloane said, dropping her keys on the table I had just dusted. "You really need to air this place out. Maddie, it is depressing. I like the smell, I said, not looking up from the journal. It smells like him. Sloane sighed. Walking over to the large bay window that looked out over the gray ocean, she ran a finger along the sill, checking for dust. Look, I know you are being sentimental. That is your thing. But Calvin says the market is peaking right now. If we list it next month, we could get over 600,000. Imagine what you could do with your share. You could finally move out of that apartment complex and buy something decent in the city. I am not selling, Sloane. She turned, her expression shifting from pity to irritation. It is not just your decision. Maddie, it is a family asset. Mom is technically the next of kin, and she thinks, Mom is not the next of kin, I cut in, my voice steady despite the thumping of my heart. Grandpa left a will. You know that. I am the executor. Sloane laughed, a short, sharp sound. Executor just means you file the paperwork. Maddie, it does not mean you are the queen of the castle. Don't be difficult. We are trying to help you. You are a legal assistant, right? You should know that fighting a family on probate is the fastest way to lose everything on lawyer fees. She walked past me, trailing her hand over the back of the vintage leather armchair. Besides, this place is too big for you. It is a family home. It needs a family. Grant and I were talking, and this would be a perfect vacation spot for us when we start having kids. We could keep it in the family, but update it. Knock down this wall, open up the kitchen. It would be breathable. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was not seeing my home. She was seeing a renovation project. She was seeing an asset she felt entitled to because she had always been the one who got the shiny things, while I got the practical ones. I am busy, Sloane, I said, turning back to the box. Fine, she said, checking her watch. Be stubborn, but Calvin is coming by on Sunday. He wants to look at the electrical panel. He says if this place is not up to code, the insurance will drop you, and then you are really screwed. She left as abruptly as she had arrived, leaving the door slightly ajar so the damp cold could seep in. That evening, Calvin called. My stepfather was a man who spoke in bullet points and ultimatums disguised as advice. He did not yell. He simply stated things with an authority he assumed no one would question. Madeline, he said, his voice booming through the receiver. Your mother tells me you are resisting the assessment. I am not resisting anything. Calvin, I am following the legal process for probate. It has only been 3 weeks. Probate is a trap, he said, his tone dismissive. It takes months, sometimes years. The state takes a cut. Lawyers take a cut. By the time you are done, the asset has depreciated. Listen to me. The smartest move is a quitclaim deed. We transfer the title to a family trust managed by me and your mother. We handle the taxes, the repairs, the insurance. You get to live there rent-free for a few months while you sort yourself out. And when we sell, we cut you a check. Clean, simple. A family trust, I repeated, writing the words down on the legal pad in front of me. And who would be the beneficiary of this trust? The family, of course, Calvin said, a little too quickly. We are all on the same team here. Don't let your little job confuse you. Maddie, being a legal assistant is fine, but do not pretend you are a lawyer. If you try to handle this estate alone, you are going to make a mistake. And when you do, the state will step in. Or worse, you will be liable for back taxes you did not even know existed. Let us handle it for you. Sign the authorization, and we will take the weight off your shoulders. I will think about it, I lied. Don't think too long, he warned. Opportunities have expiration dates. When I hung up, the silence of the house felt different. It was no longer peaceful. It was fragile. They were not asking. They were coordinating. Diane worked on my guilt. Sloane worked on my insecurity. Calvin worked on my fear of the legal system. They were a phalanx, marching toward this house with a strategy they had likely mapped out over dinner while I was eating alone in this kitchen. I needed to clear my head. I walked into the small study at the back of the house, the room where I had set up my temporary workspace. I had been careful, extremely careful. My training at Stonebridge had taught me that documentation was the only shield that mattered. I had a specific system, my personal notes, the draft of the timeline I was building, and the copies of Grandpa's original deed were kept in the bottom drawer of the heavy oak desk. I had placed them in a blue folder, beneath a stack of blank printer paper. I sat down and reached for the drawer handle. It was an old desk, and the drawer usually stuck a little, requiring a jiggle to open. Today, it slid open smoothly. I froze. My eyes scanned the contents. The blank paper was there. The blue folder was there. To an outsider, it looked untouched, but I knew how I had left it. I had aligned the edge of the blue folder perfectly parallel with the side of the drawer. It was a habit, a compulsion from years of filing. Now the folder was twisted slightly to the left, just a fraction of an inch. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I lifted the blank paper. The blue folder felt different. Lighter? No. It felt used. I opened it. The documents were inside. But the order was wrong. The deed, which I always kept on top, was now the third page down. I pulled the papers out and held them under the desk lamp. On the second page of the deed, near the corner, there was a tiny, faint crease. I ran my thumb over it. It was warm, not hot, but it held a residual, static warmth that paper only gets when it has passed through a machine recently. I looked over at the printer in the corner of the room. It was in sleep mode, but the paper tray, which I had filled to the brim yesterday, was noticeably lower. I had been out for a walk on the beach for 45 minutes this morning. Sloane had been here. She said she was looking at the drapes and the walls. She had not been looking at the decor. She had been hunting. I sat back in the chair, a cold chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the Oregon fog. They were not just pressuring me. They were building a file. They had come into my sanctuary, rifled through my private legal notes, and made copies of the documents I was using to protect myself. They did not just want the house, they wanted to know what I knew, and now they had my strategy in their hands. I stared at the disturbed papers, and for the first time since the funeral, I did not feel grief. I felt clarity. They thought I was the scared little girl who would sign whatever they put in front of her to keep the peace. They had no idea that by stealing these papers, they had just confirmed my worst suspicions. I closed the drawer quietly, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the empty house. The peace was gone. The war had begun. The invitation came via a group text message that included emojis of champagne glasses and a house, a combination that felt grotesque given the fact that we had just put my grandfather in the ground less than a month ago. Sloane called it a family harmony dinner. She insisted on hosting it at a high-end bistro in town called the Azure Table, a place where the menus had no prices and the lighting was dim enough to hide the quality of the intentions. I arrived precisely at 7 o'clock. I wore a simple black dress, the same one I wore to work when I had client meetings, armor that made me feel professional rather than familial. Sloane was already there, holding court at a round table near the window. She was wearing white, a color that dared the world to stain it, and she was laughing at something Calvin had just said. When they saw me, the laughter didn't stop, but it changed pitch. It became performative. "Maddie, you made it," Sloane chirped, waving me over as if I were a guest she had not expected to actually show up. "We ordered the seafood tower. I know you love shrimp, even though you never buy the good kind." I sat down, the linen napkins stiff in my lap. "Thank you, Sloane. That is very generous." "Generosity is what families do," Diane said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. Her palm was cold. "We are here to support you. Madeline, we know how overwhelmed you must be out there in that drafty old house all by yourself." The waiter poured wine, and the pleasantries dissolved faster than sugar in hot tea. They did not wait for the appetizers to arrive before the real agenda was placed on the table. "We have been looking at the numbers," Diane started, her voice adopting that reasonable, soft tone she used when she was asking for something unreasonable. "And we have to talk about fairness, real fairness, not just what a piece of paper says, but what people actually need." I took a sip of water. "I am listening." "Well," she continued, gesturing toward Sloane, Look at your sister. She and Grant are ready to start their lives. They are looking at neighborhoods, thinking about schools. They have a future that requires a certain footprint. You, on the other hand, sweetheart, you are settled. You have your job, your apartment in the city. You are comfortable. Does a single woman really need a 3-bedroom house on the coast? It is excess, Maddie, and excess is wasteful. So fairness means giving the house to the person who wants it most? I asked, keeping my face blank. It means giving it to the person who can utilize it, Sloane corrected, spearing a scallop with aggressive precision. Grant and I have a vision for that property. We can maximize its value. You are just maintaining it. It is stagnant with you. Calvin cleared his throat, the sound distinct and heavy. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, invading my personal space. It is not just about utility, Madeline. It is about liability. I have been thinking about your job. You are a legal assistant, correct? Yes, I said. Exactly. An assistant. You help real lawyers. You file things. You organize calendars, Calvin said, his voice dripping with a patronizing sweetness. The problem is, when you start handling an estate this complex, lines get blurred. You start reading statutes you do not fully understand. You start drafting documents that look legal but aren't, and that is dangerous. Honey, if you make one wrong move, if you file one form incorrectly, you could be accused of practicing law without a license. Do you know what the penalty is for that? It is not just a fine. It is your career. You could be blacklisted. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. He was not giving advice. He was planting a threat. I am just following the probate procedures as the executor, I said, my voice steady, though my pulse was thumping against my ribs. I am not drafting anything. I am just filling out the standard forms provided by the county. That is a gray area, Calvin said, shaking his head gravely. Very gray, and we would hate to see you get in trouble just because you were too stubborn to ask for help. Sloane set down her fork. That is why we came up with a solution, a safety net. She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a sleek, stapled document. She slid it across the tablecloth, right next to my untouched bread plate. I can take over as the primary agent. You just sign a limited power of attorney. It gives me the authority to handle the contractors, the tax assessors, and the eventual title transfer. You step back, you stay safe, and you don't risk your little job. Calvin and I handle the heavy lifting. I looked down at the document. It was already drafted. My name was typed out in bold letters. Madeline Clark, grantor. Sloane's name was listed as attorney-in-fact. You just want to help me, I stated, not as a question, but as a mirror. We are saving you from yourself, Diane added, taking a sip of her Chardonnay. It is the only logical choice. I did not touch the paper. I did not push it away, nor did I pick it up. I simply memorized the heading, General Power of Attorney. It was not limited. As Sloane had said, it was general. If I signed this, she could empty my bank account, sell my car, and yes, transfer the deed to the house without me ever knowing. I will need to read it over, I said. I never sign anything at dinner. Sloane rolled her eyes, a gesture of impatience she didn't bother to hide. God, you are so bureaucratic. Fine, take it, but don't take too long. The market waits for no one. The rest of the dinner was a blur of chewing and polite nodding. I detached myself, floating somewhere above the table, observing them like specimens in a jar. I cataloged every word they used: sign, transfer, safety, liability. They were building a vocabulary of coercion. When the check came, Calvin made a show of grabbing it, but I noticed he didn't even look at the total. He handed his card to the waiter with a wink. Family takes care of family, he said, staring directly at me. As we were leaving the restaurant, my phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out, expecting a work email. It was a text message from Aunt Linda, a woman I had not spoken to since Christmas 2 years ago. Hi, Maddie. Hope you are holding up. Your mom mentioned you are handling the legal side of the estate. I didn't know you were studying to be an attorney. That is so brave to take on cases before passing the bar. Be careful, honey. I stopped walking on the sidewalk. The cool night air suddenly felt freezing. I had never told anyone I was studying to be an attorney. I wasn't. I had never claimed to be taking on cases. Diane and Calvin were walking ahead, arm in arm. Sloane was typing furiously on her phone. They weren't just pressuring me to sign the house over. They were seeding the narrative. They were telling people, family, likely friends, maybe even professional contacts, that I was acting as a lawyer. They were creating a witness list for a crime I hadn't committed. "Maddie, you coming?" Sloane called out, pausing by her car. "I need to stop by the house to pick up that scarf I left there last time, the cashmere one." "Yes," I said, forcing my legs to move. "I am coming." We drove separately. When we arrived back at the cottage, the silence of the ocean was a stark contrast to the noise in my head. I unlocked the front door, and Sloane breezed past me, not heading for the living room where she claimed to have left a scarf, but heading straight down the hallway toward the study. "I think I left it on the chair in there," she shouted over her shoulder. I followed her, my footsteps silent on the hardwood. I stopped in the doorway. Sloane wasn't looking for a scarf. She was standing by my desk. Her back was to me, but I could see her reflection in the dark window pane. She held her phone up, not to her ear, but flat, hovering over the surface of the desk. On the desk sat a file I had been working on earlier that morning. It was labeled Trust Option Notes. It contained my handwritten research on how to place the house into a revocable trust that would bypass probate and keep the assets safe from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. It also contained notes on constructive trusts and undue influence. Flash. The screen of her phone lit up the room for a split second. She wasn't just looking. She was documenting. She was gathering proof that I was researching complex legal structures, proof she could later twist to look like I was drafting legal instruments for a client. She swiped the screen, checked the photo, and then slipped the phone into her pocket. She turned around, feigning surprise when she saw me standing there. "Oh, there it is," she said, snatching a beige scarf from the back of the chair, a scarf I knew for a fact had been in the hallway closet when I left. "Found it. Well, I am exhausted. Thanks for dinner, even though you didn't eat much." She walked past me, smelling of expensive perfume and deceit. "Good night, Sloane," I said. "Night, sis. Think about the paperwork. Tick-tock." When the front door closed, I didn't lock it immediately. I walked back to the desk. I looked at the file. She had the photo. She had the text messages seated with the family. Calvin had the thread about the state bar. They thought they were closing in on a helpless prey. They thought they were gathering evidence to crush me. But as I stood there in the dark, listening to the engine of her BMW fade into the distance, I realized they had just made their first fatal mistake. They had shown me their weapon, and a weapon, once revealed, can be taken apart, studied, and turned around. I pulled out my own phone, opened a new note, and typed a single line. Date, October 12th. Incident, unauthorized photography of privileged work product. Witness, self. I wasn't just a legal assistant. I was the person who organized the evidence that put people away. And my family had just handed me Exhibit A. I drove 40 minutes inland to meet Jonah Pierce. I needed to be away from the salt air, away from the prying eyes of neighbors who might report my movements to my mother, and certainly away from the cottage where Sloane had likely planted more than just seeds of doubt. Jonah was an estate attorney recommended by a senior partner at my firm. He was not the type of lawyer who wore Italian suits or advertised on billboards. His office was located in a converted brick building in downtown Salem, smelling faintly of coffee beans and old toner. He was a man in his 50s with sleeves rolled up to his elbows and a desk that looked chaotic to the untrained eye but was, I suspected, meticulously ordered. I sat across from him, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. I had laid out everything. The copy of the General Power of Attorney Sloane had tried to force on me, the text messages, and the incident with the photograph. Jonah picked up the Power of Attorney document. He adjusted his glasses, read the first paragraph, and then tossed it onto the desk with a heavy thud. "Standard predatory tactics," Jonah said, his voice gravelly and devoid of surprise. "It is a broad-form instrument. If you had signed this, your sister could have legally sold the house to herself for $10, and there would have been very little you could do about it without a 3-year court battle." "I did not sign it," I said. "Good, but that is not what worries me." Jonah leaned back, studying me. "Maddie, you work in compliance. You know how paper trails work, but you are thinking like a professional. You need to start thinking like a criminal." I blinked. "My family are not criminals. Jonah, they are just greedy." "In probate, there is a very thin line between greed and fraud," he corrected. "Right now, they are trying to create what we call documentary truth. They do not need you to agree. They just need a piece of paper that looks official enough to fool a clerk at the county recorder's office. They could use a mobile notary who doesn't check IDs closely. They could forge a signature. Once a deed is recorded, even if it is fraudulent, it becomes the truth of record. Undoing it is 10 times harder than stopping it." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I had been worried about arguments at the dinner table. Jonah was talking about felonies. "So what do?" I asked. "Change the locks? Put up cameras?" "You could," Jonah said, "but physical barriers won't stop paper threats. We need a quiet legal structure. We need to file an affidavit of heirship immediately, listing you as the sole executor and beneficiary under the will. We need to file it today. We create a barrier. If they try to slip a quitclaim deed in next week, the clerk will see a conflict in the chain of title. It freezes everything." "Okay," I said, pulling out my notepad. "I can draft the affidavit. I know the format." Jonah held up a hand. "Stop." I paused, pen hovering over the paper. "That right there." He pointed at my pen. "That is your vulnerability." "What do you mean?" "Your family knows you work in law. But you are not a lawyer," Jonah said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I listened to what you said about your stepfather, about his comments regarding your job, about your sister taking photos of your research notes. They are just trying to make me feel incompetent," I said. "No, Maddie. They are not attacking your competence. They are attacking your license, or rather, the fact that you don't have one." Jonah leaned forward, his expression grave. "In the state of Oregon, as in most places, the unauthorized practice of law is a serious offense. It is not just a fine, it is a career ender. If you are seen drafting legal instruments for the estate, giving legal advice to family members, or acting in a capacity that reserves itself for a barred attorney, the state bar can come down on you hard." I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. The text from Aunt Linda suddenly flashed in my mind. "I didn't know you were taking on cases." "They are setting me up," I whispered. "That is why Sloan wanted a picture of my notes on trusts. That is why Calvin keeps warning me about liability." "Exactly," Jonah said. "If you fight them too hard on the house, they won't sue you for the property. That is too expensive. Instead, they will file a complaint with the state bar. They will claim you are impersonating a lawyer, that you are confusing the family with bad legal advice, and that you are using your position at Stonebridge to manipulate the estate. They will aim for your job. If you lose your income, you lose the ability to pay the property taxes. You lose the house by default." It was diabolical, and it was exactly the kind of strategic cruelty Calvin was capable of. He wouldn't stab me in the front. He would poison the water supply. "I have been doing everything by the book," I argued, though my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "I am the executor. I am allowed to handle administrative duties." "The bar doesn't know that," Jonah said. "They only know what is reported to them. And if your family submits a complaint with photos of legal research you conducted and testimony from relatives saying you offered to represent them, the investigation alone could get you suspended from work." I looked at the window. The world outside was sunny and normal. People walking by with lattes, completely unaware that my own mother and sister were plotting to dismantle my professional existence just to get their hands on a beach house. "We need a firewall," I said, my compliance training kicking in. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a risk manager. I need an audit trail. Yes, Jonah nodded. From this moment on, you draft nothing. I draft everything. You sign nothing as a legal professional, only as executor, and we need a timeline. We spent the next 2 hours constructing a defense for a crime I hadn't yet been accused of. I pulled up my phone records. I opened my cloud storage. We created a spreadsheet. October 2nd. Call from Diane. Subject: tax liability. Note: she asked for legal interpretation of the assessment. I declined and referred her to a CPA. October 5th. Visit from Calvin. Comment: don't play lawyer. Context: I was holding a standard probate court form. October 12th. Dinner at the Azure table. Incident: Sloan presented a drafted power of attorney. I refused to sign. October 12th. Text from Aunt Linda. Content: implies she was told I am taking cases. This is good, Jonah said, looking at the timeline. We need to document every interaction. Every time they try to bait you into giving advice, you document your refusal. Every time they ask you to handle a document, you record that you referred them to outside counsel. I can't let them know I know, I said. If they know I am preparing for a bar complaint, they will escalate. Correct, Jonah said. You need to be boring. You need to be soft. Let them think the pressure is working. Let them think you are on the verge of cracking. If they think you are weak, they will get sloppy. They will get arrogant. And arrogant people leave paper trails. I left Jonah's office with a heavy folder of certified documents. Documents that he had drafted and that I had merely signed. I had the affidavit of heirship. I had a formal retention letter proving I had hired him, which established that I was not acting as my own attorney. But the drive back to Waverly Point felt different. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't the panic of a child being scolded anymore. It was the cold, hard focus of a professional dealing with a hostile counterparty. When I got back to the cottage, I didn't go inside immediately. I checked the mailbox. It was empty. I checked the perimeter. No new tire tracks. I went inside and made a show of being tired. I knew Sloan sometimes drove by in the evenings to see if lights were on. I turned on the living room lamp, poured a glass of wine, and sat where I could be seen from the road. I slumped my shoulders. I let my head hang low. I performed the role of the defeated daughter. Then, I closed the curtains. I went to the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I didn't open my work email. Instead, I created a new, encrypted folder on my personal drive. I named it Project Firewall. I uploaded the photos of the documents Jonah and I had prepared. I uploaded the screenshots of the text messages from Aunt Linda and my mother. I exported my call logs. My phone buzzed. It was Diane. Hi, honey. Calvin was just saying we should probably help you pack up some of those old boxes this weekend. It must be so dusty there. We can bring a truck. They were accelerating. They wanted me out before the end of the month. They wanted the house empty so they could change the locks and claim possession. I typed back, keeping my tone meek. That sounds helpful. Mom, I am feeling really tired. Maybe we can talk about the plan on Sunday. I hit send. I was feeding the beast, keeping it calm while I sharpened the knife. I looked at the timeline I had started on my screen. It looked like a conspiracy theory board, but every point was a dagger aimed at my integrity. They had weaponized my education. They had turned my own competence into a liability. I remembered what Jonah had said as I was walking out the door. He had looked me dead in the eye, his expression void of any comforting lawyerly platitudes. Be careful, Maddie, he had said. If they report you to the state bar, they won't just want the house. They will want you to lose your license to work. They want to make you unemployable, so you have no choice but to depend on them again. It is about control. I closed the laptop. The house creaked in the wind. A sound that used to frighten me. Now, it sounded like the house was bracing itself, and so was I. Sunday arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The morning fog had burned off early, leaving the sky a brilliant, exposing blue that made the weathered shingles of the cottage look even more fragile. I was in the kitchen, washing the single coffee mug I had used, when the sound of gravel crunching under heavy tires shattered the quiet. It was not Sloane's sleek sedan this time. It was a large, black SUV, the kind that suburban families bought to project an image of rugged capability they never actually utilized. Through the window, I watched them spill out of the vehicle like a tactical unit deployed to secure a hostile perimeter. Calvin was driving, Diane was in the passenger seat, clutching her purse to her chest, and Sloane stepped out of the back, wearing sunglasses and a look of absolute, unshakable victory. They did not knock. The front door swung open, bringing with it a gust of wind and the overwhelming energy of people who believed they owned the ground they stood on. I dried my hands on a dish towel and turned to face them. I did not offer coffee. I did not say hello. I simply leaned against the counter, crossing my arms over my chest to hide the fact that my heart was hammering a rhythm of pure adrenaline against my ribs. Sloane marched to the kitchen island. She was holding a manila envelope, but she did not open it immediately. She placed it on the counter with a heavy, deliberate slap. "It is done," Sloane said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a vibration of finality. "We are not debating anymore, Maddie. We are not negotiating fairness. We are executing the plan." Calvin walked in behind her, standing tall, his chest puffed out. He looked less like a stepfather and more like a corporate liquidator. "We tried to do this the easy way. Madeline, we tried to talk sense into you at dinner, but you made it clear you were not interested in protecting the family interests. So, we had to take steps to protect them for you." Diane lingered by the doorway, her face pale. She looked at the floor, then at the cabinets, anywhere but at me. "It is better this way, sweetheart. Really, it takes the burden off you. You were drowning here. We could all see it." "What is done?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. I needed them to say it. I needed the words in the air. Sloane smirked and flipped the envelope open. She slid a document toward me. It was a thick stack of paper, stapled at the top. The first page bore the seal of the county clerk, or at least a very convincing facsimile of one. At the bottom, a bright red stamp read, "Recorded." "Title transfer," Sloane said, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. "The house is in my name now. Well, technically, it is in a holding company that lists me as the primary beneficiary, but the result is the same. The deed has been processed. You are officially a guest in my house." I looked down at the document. I did not touch it. My eyes scanned the visible text. It was a quitclaim deed. I saw the date, October 14th, 2 days ago. I saw a signature on the grantor line. It was a scrawl that looked remarkably like mine, but slightly too looped, slightly too hesitant. "I never signed this," I said. My statement was not an accusation. It was a test. I wanted to see how they would justify the forgery. Calvin stepped forward, his shadow falling over the paper. "You signed a lot of things during the funeral preparations. Madeline, papers for the funeral home, papers for the insurance, papers for the hospital. You were grieving. You were confused. It is understandable that you don't remember every single document we put in front of you to help manage the chaos." The gaslighting was breathtaking in its audacity. He was suggesting that I, a woman whose entire career was built on reading fine print, had accidentally signed away a $600,000 property while picking out a casket. "So you are saying I signed this 3 weeks ago?" I asked. "The date is just when it was notarized," Sloane cut in, impatient. "The point is, it is legal, it is filed, it has a stamp. You can call the county on Monday if you want, but by the time you get through their automated system, the locks will already be changed." She leaned closer, removing her sunglasses to reveal eyes that held zero empathy. "I want you out. Maddie, not next week, not by the end of the month. I want you out before the sun goes down today. I have a crew coming tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock to start stripping the floors. I don't want your boxes in their way." I looked at Diane. "Mom, you are okay with this? You are okay with Sloane kicking me out on a Sunday with 4 hours of notice?" Diane finally looked at me, her eyes wet with tears that I instantly recognized as self-pity. not sorrow. It is not kicking you out, Maddie. It is relocating you. You have your apartment in the city. You have a life there. This house is just an anchor dragging you down. Sloan is right. We need to move forward. And frankly, your refusal to cooperate was tearing the family apart. I had to choose peace. You chose theft, I thought, but I did not say it. Instead, I looked back at the document. I focused on the notary stamp. Jennifer L. Pringle, Mobile Notary Public. The commission expiration date was blurry. The stamp looked slightly uneven, as if it had been applied by a hand that was shaking, or perhaps by someone who had bought the stamp online without passing the requisite background checks. I realized then that they were terrified. They had rushed this. They had forged a signature, backdated a document, and found a shady notary because they knew I was meeting with Jonah Pierce. They knew I was building a defense, and they wanted to decapitate my efforts with a shock and awe campaign. If I fought them now, if I screamed about forgery and called the police, they would retreat. They would claim it was a misunderstanding. They would hide the evidence. Calvin would shred this document, and they would try a different, more subtle angle. I needed them to commit. I needed them to believe they had won so completely that they would lower their shields. I took a deep breath. I let my shoulders slump. I uncrossed my arms and let them hang by my sides. A physical posture of surrender. I lowered my eyes to the floor. "Okay," I said softly. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. The wind outside seemed to stop. "Excuse me?" Sloan asked, suspicion sharpening her tone. "I said okay," I repeated, looking up at her with eyes that I hoped looked defeated. I can't fight you on this. I don't have the money for a lawyer to contest a deed. And if Mom thinks this is best for the family, then fine. I am tired. Sloan, I am just really tired." I saw the tension drain out of Diane's body. She let out a long, shuddering breath. "Oh, thank God. Thank God. Maddie, you are finally seeing reason." Calvin chuckled, a low, satisfied sound. He reached out and patted my shoulder, his hand heavy and patronizing. "Good girl. I knew you would come around. You are smart. Madeline, you know when you are beaten, and really, this isn't a defeat. It is a release. You are free of this burden now." Sloan was the last to relax. She studied my face, looking for a crack in the mask, but I gave her nothing but exhaustion. Finally, she smiled, a cruel, triumphant curving of her lips. "Well," she said, snatching the document back and sliding it into her bag, "that was easier than I thought. I guess you do know your place after all." She checked her gold wristwatch. "It is 1 o'clock now. I want the keys on the counter by 6 o'clock. Don't take anything that belongs to the house. No furniture, no appliances. Just your clothes and your personal junk. I will check the inventory." "I understand," I said. "And Maddie," Calvin added, turning back from the door, his finger raised in a final warning. "Don't get any ideas about filing complaints or whining to your little paralegal friends. The deed is done, literally. If you try to make trouble now, you will just be embarrassing yourself. And we might have to revisit that conversation about you practicing law without a license. We would hate to file a report because you were being vindictive." "I won't do anything," I said. "I just want to go home." "Good," he said. "We will be waiting for the text that you are gone." They turned and marched out. The dynamic had shifted completely. When they arrived, they were invaders. Now, they were landlords inspecting a vacated property. They got back into the black SUV, the doors slamming shut with the solid thud of a bank vault closing. I stood in the window and watched them reverse down the long driveway. Sloan was already on her phone, probably calling her husband to tell him they had won. Diane was reapplying her lipstick in the visor mirror. Calvin was adjusting the rearview mirror, looking at the house one last time with possessive pride. I waited until the SUV disappeared around the bend of the coastal road. I waited another full minute to make sure they hadn't forgotten something. Then, I locked the front door. The exhaustion I had feigned evaporated instantly. My spine straightened. My mind, which had been recording every word, every gesture, and every threat shifted into processing mode. They had shown me the forgery. They had admitted to the timeline. They had threatened me with the state bar complaint in the presence of witnesses, even if those witnesses were themselves. But most importantly, they had taken the document with them. They thought they were protecting it, but they were actually carrying the evidence of a felony across state lines. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were steady. I opened the encrypted messaging app I used to communicate with Jonah. I typed 3 words. They took the bait. I sent it, then I added a second message. They presented a forged quitclaim deed. They claimed it is recorded. They gave me 5 hours to vacate. I am leaving, but I'm not taking the trash out. I am preserving the crime scene. I went to the kitchen island where Sloan had slapped the envelope down. I pulled a pair of latex gloves from my cleaning kit under the sink. Gloves I had been using to scrub the bathrooms. I put them on. I took a clear photo of the surface where the envelope had rested. Then, I walked to the study. I didn't pack my clothes first. I packed the files. The project firewall drive went into my bag. The hard copies of my grandfather's real will went into a waterproof casing. Then, I sat down at my laptop. I didn't feel sadness about leaving the house. The house was just wood and glass. The real battle wasn't about the real estate anymore. It was about the law. I opened a new folder on my desktop. I didn't name it moving or personal. I typed the name in all caps, Bar Complaint, Prep. Inside, I created a subfolder, Evidence of Extortion. I typed a quick summary of the last 10 minutes. Perpetrators, Calvin, Diane, Sloan, mechanism, presentation of fraudulent deed, coercion, threat of state, bar complaint used to force eviction, status, document visually identified as forgery, incorrect notary stamp, suspect signature. I closed the laptop and snapped it shut. I had 5 hours to pack, but I knew I would be done in 2. I wanted to leave early. I wanted to be gone before the sun went down. I wanted them to come back tomorrow morning to an empty house and think they had won. I wanted them to feel safe. Because the safer they felt, the harder they would fall when the floor dropped out from under them, and I was the one holding the lever. The fluorescent lights of the Stonebridge Compliance Group office hummed with a frequency that usually comforted me. It was the sound of order, of regulations being met, of boxes being checked. But on Monday morning, less than 24 hours after I had surrendered the keys to my grandfather's cottage, that hum felt like the prelude to a migraine. I was sitting at my dual-monitor workstation, trying to focus on a routine audit for a mid-sized construction firm, when the internal chat window popped up on my screen. It was from Marcus, the senior compliance officer. "Maddie, can you come to my office? Now, bring your laptop." My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. "Bring your laptop" was corporate shorthand for an interrogation, or worse, a termination. I disconnected the device from the dock, my hands trembling slightly, and walked down the gray-carpeted hallway. The distance from my cubicle to his corner office was only 50 feet, but it felt like walking the length of a pier during a storm. When I entered, Marcus was not alone. The human resources director, a woman named Sheila, who usually only appeared for birthday cake or layoffs, was sitting in the guest chair. Marcus looked pale. He did not ask me to sit. "Maddie," Marcus started, his voice tight. "We received a disturbing phone call this morning, an anonymous tip line report." "Regarding what?" I asked, hugging my laptop to my chest like a shield. "Regarding your extracurricular activities," Sheila cut in, her tone clipped and professional. "The caller alleged that you are using Stonebridge Resources and your title here to solicit private clients for legal services, specifically, estate planning and trust formation." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That is a lie. I don't have private clients. I am a legal assistant. I know the boundaries of my role." "We know that, theoretically," Marcus said, turning his monitor around so I could see it. "But then, 10 minutes after the call, we received this email. It was sent from a burner account." I leaned in. On the screen was a photograph. It was the picture Sloan had taken in the study at the cottage, but it had been cropped. The top of the page, where I had handwritten grandfather's estate, personal notes, was gone. The bottom, where I had doodled a question mark next to a tax code, was gone. What remained was a center frame showing a typed list of trust structures: irrevocable life insurance trust, qualified personal residence trust, and grantor retained annuity trust. Next to them were bullet points about tax minimization strategies. Without the context of it being for my own family's estate, it looked exactly like professional work product prepared for a paying customer. The subject line says, "Stonebridge employee selling legal advice" on the side. Marcus read aloud, "Maddie, you know we have a zero-tolerance policy for moonlighting, especially anything that could be construed as the unauthorized practice of law. If you are drafting trusts for people—" "I am not," I said, my voice rising. "That is my handwriting. Yes, but those are notes for my grandfather's estate. I am the executor. I was researching options for myself. That photo was taken inside my private home by my sister." Marcus and Sheila exchanged a look. It was the look of people who wanted to believe me but were terrified of liability. "We have to investigate," Sheila said. "Until we clear this up, we are locking your access to the client database. You will be placed on administrative leave for 48 hours while we review your email logs and file history." "Administrative leave?" I repeated. "You are suspending me? Because of an anonymous email?" "We have to protect the firm, Maddie," Marcus said, looking down at his desk. "If the state bar gets wind that our assistants are playing lawyer, we all lose our licenses. Just go home. Let us do the audit." I walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box with my personal mug and a potted succulent, the universal symbols of corporate exile. The sun was shining in the parking lot, bright and indifferent. I sat in my car and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They hadn't waited. I thought leaving the house would buy me a week, maybe 2. I thought they would be too busy celebrating their victory with the house to bother with me, but I was wrong. They didn't just want the asset. They wanted to cripple my ability to fight back. If I lost my job, I lost my income. If I lost my income, I couldn't pay Jonah. If I couldn't pay Jonah, the house was theirs forever. I called Jonah immediately. "They moved fast," he said, his voice grim over the Bluetooth speaker. "This is the pincer maneuver. Strike the assets, then strike the credibility." "I am suspended. Jonah, they sent the photo Sloan took. They cropped it." "Okay, listen to me," Jonah said, the sound of him shuffling papers coming through the line. "Do not panic. This is actually good for us. Though it doesn't feel like it, they are overreaching. We need to turn this inquiry into our shield. I need you to gather every performance review, every job description signed by your supervisors, and every email where you explicitly referred a client to an attorney. We are going to build a portfolio that proves you are the most compliant legal assistant in the history of Oregon." "But my job—" "Your job is the leverage they are using," Jonah interrupted. "If we prove the complaint is malicious, we don't just save your job, we prove intent to harm. That changes this from a family dispute to tortious interference with business relations. Do exactly what I say. Go home. Do not contact them. Let the silence terrify them." I drove back to my apartment in the city. It was a small one-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor. Sterile and quiet, a stark contrast to the creaking warmth of the cottage. I put my box on the kitchen counter and stared at my phone. It buzzed, a text from Diane. "Maddie, are you okay? I heard from Aunt Linda that someone was asking questions about your work. I am so worried. Please tell me you didn't do anything illegal. I just want to protect you. You know you can't handle the pressure of big legal matters." I read the message twice. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. She was feigning ignorance while planting the seed that I was incompetent. "I heard from Aunt Linda." No, she hadn't. She was the one who told Aunt Linda what to say. I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, a text from Sloan arrived. There was no pretense of affection here. "I heard you had a rough morning at work. Bummer. Look, this whole thing can go away. Just sign a waiver confirming the transfer of the house and promising not to contest the deed. If you do that, Maybe the anonymous source will realize they made a mistake and withdraw the complaint. We just want peace. Maddie, don't be a martyr. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. There it was, the quid pro quo. Sign the house over, and we will stop destroying your career. She had typed it. She had actually put it in writing. They were so confident in my submission, so sure that I was the same quiet, pushover Maddie, that they didn't even bother to code their extortion anymore. I took a screenshot, then another. I uploaded them immediately to the Project Firewall folder. You have no idea what you just did, I whispered to the empty room. I spent the afternoon following Jonah's instructions. I dug through my old hard drives for archived work evaluations. I found an email from 3 years ago where I corrected a junior associate on a filing deadline. Proof of my competence and adherence to hierarchy. I was building a wall of facts to stand against their wave of lies. But the anxiety was a physical weight. I paced the small living room. Every time a car passed outside, I flinched. I felt exposed, stripped of the professional identity I had worked so hard to build. They had violated my home, and now they had violated my workplace. There was nowhere left to retreat. At 4 o'clock, I went down to the lobby to check my mail. I usually enjoyed this ritual, the mindless sorting of bills and flyers. Today, my hand hesitated on the small metal key. I opened box 3B. Inside, nestled between a coupon for pizza and an electric bill, was a long, white envelope. The return address was embossed in black ink. Oregon State Bar, Client Assistance Office, Unlawful Practice of Law Committee. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I took the envelope upstairs. I laid it on my kitchen table. I didn't open it immediately. I made a cup of tea, though I knew I wouldn't drink it. I needed to steady my hands. I sliced the envelope open with a kitchen knife. The letter was formal, printed on heavy bond paper. Dear Ms. Clark, this letter is to inform you that the Oregon State Bar has received a formal complaint alleging that you have engaged in the unauthorized practice of law in violation of ORS 9.160. The complaint alleges that you have held yourself out as an attorney to family members and have prepared legal instruments regarding the disposition of real property without supervision. We have opened an investigation into this matter. You are hereby requested to provide a written response to these allegations within 21 days. I read the words, but I didn't feel the panic I expected. Instead, I felt a cold, hard click in my mind, like a chamber locking into place. They had done it. They had actually pulled the trigger. Diane's concern. Sloane's negotiation. Calvin's advice. It had all led to this single piece of paper. They believed this letter would break me. They believed that upon reading this, I would call them, weeping, begging for them to make it stop, ready to sign away the house, my inheritance, and my dignity just to make the investigation go away. They were wrong. This letter wasn't my death sentence. It was my admission ticket. By filing a formal complaint, they had moved our conflict out of the shadows of the family dining room and into the jurisdiction of the state. They had invited a third party to look at the evidence. They had invited a judge. I picked up my phone and dialed Jonah. It is here, I said when he answered. The letter? Yes, case number 24901. Okay, Jonah said. How do you feel? I looked at the letter, then at the screenshot of Sloane's extortion text on my laptop screen. I looked at the bar complaint prep folder that was already filled with dates, times, and forged documents. I feel, I said, my voice surprising me with its steadiness, like they just walked into a room, locked the door, and realized too late that they are not the ones holding the key. Get some sleep, Maddie, Jonah said. Tomorrow, we stop defending. Tomorrow, we start the counterattack. I hung up. I didn't sleep. I sat up all night, drafting my response. Not a plea for mercy, but a timeline of truth. I wrote until the sun came up, fueling myself on the realization that for 29 years, I had been the daughter who fixed things, and now I was going to fix this, permanently. The disciplinary hearing took place in a windowless conference room in a satellite office of the State Bar in Tigard. Not a courtroom. There was no gallery, no jury box, and no gavel. There was only a long mahogany table, a stenographer typing silently in the corner, and the crushing weight of my entire professional future hanging in the recycled air. I sat on the left side of the table. Jonah was next to me, his presence a solid block of calm against the buzzing anxiety in my veins. Across from us sat the bar counsel, a man named Mr. Henderson, who looked overworked and unimpressed, shuffling through a stack of files that contained the story of my alleged corruption. At the head of the table sat Disciplinary Judge Elena Ward. She was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair cut into a sharp bob and eyes that seemed to have seen every variation of lawyerly deceit possible. She did not smile when we entered. She simply pointed to the chairs and opened her laptop. "We are here to review the complaint regarding Madeline Clark," Judge Ward said, her voice dry. "Case number 24901. Allegations include the unauthorized practice of law, misrepresentation of credentials, and predation upon vulnerable family members for financial gain. Mr. Henderson, you may proceed." Henderson cleared his throat. "Thank you, Your Honor. This complaint was filed by a concerned citizen who wishes to remain anonymous, though the details provided are quite specific." He slid a copy of the complaint across the table. I didn't need to read it to know who wrote it, but seeing the words on paper made my stomach turn. The subject has repeatedly used her position at a compliance firm to intimidate her elderly mother and sister. She uses legal jargon to confuse them, drafts complex instruments regarding real estate, and has explicitly stated she is acting as their counsel. The phrasing was undeniable. Instruments. Predation. Egregious violation. It was Calvin. It was the same corporate speak he used when he was trying to sound important at dinner parties. He hadn't just reported me. He had written a press release for my destruction. "We also have sworn affidavits from the family members in question," Henderson continued, pulling out 2 more sheets. Diane Clark, the mother, states that Madeline ordered her to provide tax returns and interpreted the probate code to prevent the sale of the family home. Sloane Clark, the sister, claims Madeline presented herself as the legal authority of the estate and threatened them with lawsuits if they did not comply. I looked at the signatures at the bottom of the pages. Diane's loopy, hesitant script. Sloane's sharp, aggressive spikes. They had actually done it. They had sworn under penalty of perjury that I was the predator, knowing full well they were the ones who had forced me out of my home 48 hours ago. "Ms. Clark," Judge Ward said, her eyes fixing on me, "how do you respond to the allegation that you drafted a trust document for your mother?" Jonah touched my arm lightly, a signal to let him lead, but I shook my head. I needed to speak. "I did not draft a trust, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. "I printed a blank template from the county website. I gave it to my mother and told her she needed to take it to a qualified estate planning attorney. I specifically recommended 3 different firms in the area." Henderson picked up a piece of paper. "We have an email here from you to your sister, dated October 2nd. You wrote, 'The tax implication of a transfer now would be 18%. You need to structure this as an inheritance, not a gift.' That sounds like legal advice. Ms. Clark, you are analyzing the law and applying it to a specific set of facts." "That is not legal advice," I countered, leaning forward. "That is a direct quote from the FAQ page of the Oregon Department of Revenue. I sent her the link in the very next line of that email. I was not interpreting the code. I was reciting public information." Jonah stepped in, his voice smooth and authoritative. "Your Honor, Ms. Clark is a certified compliance professional. Her job is to know the regulations. There is a distinct difference between practicing law and possessing knowledge. My client has been meticulous. Every email, every text, every conversation ends with her directing her family to seek independent counsel. The complainant has cherry-picked sentences to create a narrative that simply does not exist." Henderson didn't look convinced. He was looking at the photo, the cropped one Sloane had taken of my desk. And this? Trust option notes. Why were you researching grantor retained annuity trusts if not to implement one? I am the executor of the estate, I said. I have a fiduciary duty to understand the assets I am managing. Educating myself is not a crime. Implementing it without a license would be, and I never implemented anything. I never drafted a deed. I never filed a motion. Henderson paused. He reached into his folder and pulled out a document I hadn't seen before. A small smile played on his lips. We have an additional witness statement, Henderson said, from a Ms. Brenda Halloway, a cousin of the family. I frowned. Brenda? I hadn't seen Brenda in 5 years. Ms. Halloway states that during a phone call on September 30th, you told her, and I quote, I am going to use the law to teach this family a lesson they will never forget. I have the power to ruin them paper by paper. The room went silent. It was a damning statement. It painted me not as a helpful paralegal, but as a vindictive vigilante using the legal system as a weapon. Judge Ward leaned back, her expression darkening. That is a very specific threat. Ms. Clark, did you say that? I felt a flash of cold panic, followed immediately by the warmth of realization. I knew exactly what call Brenda was talking about, and I knew exactly what I had said. I opened my laptop bag and pulled out the thick binder Jonah and I had prepared. I flipped to the tab marked Communications, Halloway. I did speak to Brenda on September 30th, I said, sliding a printed screenshot of a text thread across the table toward the judge. But we were not talking about my family. We were talking about her homeowners association. Judge Ward picked up the paper. Brenda was being fined for leaving her trash cans out too long, I explained. She asked me if she should egg the HOA president's house. I told her no. I told her to read the bylaws. The full text, Your Honor, which I have preserved from my cloud backup, reads, Don't do anything stupid. Use the bylaws. Use the law to teach them a lesson. If you follow the rules better than they do, you win on paper. I pointed to the document in the judge's hand. The quote was about trash cans and an HOA president named Mr. Henderson. No relation. I assume. My family has taken a snippet of a conversation I had with a third party about a completely different topic and contextualized it to fit their fabrication. Judge Ward read the text log. She looked at the date. She looked at the context. Then she looked up at the bar counsel. Mr. Henderson, the judge said, her voice dropping an octave. Did your investigator verify the context of this statement before including it in the complaint? We relied on the sworn statement of the witness, Your Honor. Henderson stammered, losing his earlier confidence. So you have a concerned citizen who writes like a corporate litigator, 2 family members who claim to be victims despite living in the house in question, and a witness who is quoting conversations about trash cans as evidence of estate fraud. Judge Ward summarized. She closed the file folder in front of her. She turned her gaze to me. It wasn't a friendly look, but it was a calculating one. She was stripping away the noise and looking at the mechanics of the situation. Ms. Clark, she said, you are an intelligent woman. You work in compliance. You clearly document everything. So tell me something. Yes, Your Honor. If your family truly believed you were incompetent, or that you were stealing from them, or that you were mismanaging the estate, why are we here? I paused. I don't understand the question. The State Bar, Judge Ward said, gesturing around the sterile room. This is a disciplinary body. We regulate licenses. We don't award damages. We don't transfer property titles. If you were truly practicing law illegally and costing them money, the logical venue would be a civil court. They would sue you for malpractice. They would sue you for breach of fiduciary duty. They would want their money back. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. But they didn't sue you. They reported you. They chose the one path that offers them no financial restitution, but guarantees the destruction of your career. Why? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. It was the question Jonah had warned me about, but coming from the judge, it sounded like an invitation. Because they don't want the money, Your Honor, I said quietly. They already have the house. They forced me out on Sunday. This isn't about restitution. It is about leverage. They filed this to ensure I would be too afraid to challenge the method by which they took the property. Henderson started to object. Your Honor, the property dispute is not relevant to the UPL charge. It is entirely relevant to the credibility of the complainants. Judge Ward snapped. She looked back at me. You said they forced you out on Sunday? And they filed this complaint. When? The anonymous call was Monday morning, I said. The email to my boss was Monday afternoon. The formal letter arrived Monday evening. Judge Ward tapped her pen against the mahogany table. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a judge doing math and finding that the numbers didn't add up. Mr. Henderson, she said finally, this hearing is preliminary, so I am not issuing a ruling today. However, I am ordering a full expansion of the scope. I want to see the underlying probate documents. I want to see the title transfer Ms. Clark just mentioned. If this body is being weaponized to settle a domestic property dispute, I will be very displeased. She looked at me one last time. Ms. Clark, you are still under investigation. Do not leave the state. Do not delete any files. And for God's sake, do not draft any trusts. I won't, Your Honor. We are adjourned. As we walked out into the gray hallway, my knees felt like water. I leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. Jonah was packing his briefcase, a small, grim smile on his face. She saw it, he murmured. She didn't say it explicitly, but she saw it. Saw what? I asked. She saw that the timeline is too perfect, Jonah said. Civil suits take months. A bar complaint is a grenade you can throw instantly. She knows they are trying to silence you. I thought about the judge's question. Why the bar complaint instead of a civil suit? It was the crack in their armor. Calvin thought he was being clever by using the state to do his dirty work. He thought the bar was a hammer he could swing at will. But he had forgotten that judges are not just bureaucrats. They are human lie detectors. Jonah, I said, pulling out my phone to check the project firewall folder. She asked to see the title transfer. She did. The one they filed on Monday, I said. The one with the mobile notary stamp. Jonah stopped walking. He looked at me, and his eyes widened. If she pulls that record, Jonah said, his voice dropping to a whisper, she isn't just going to see a property dispute. She is going to see the forgery. Exactly, I said. Calvin invited the fox into the henhouse because he thought he was the farmer. He didn't realize he is the chicken. I pushed off the wall and started walking toward the exit. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by a cold, driving purpose. Judge Ward hadn't dismissed the case, but she had opened the door, and I was going to drive a truckload of evidence right through it. The copy of the deed lay on Jonah's desk like a dead thing waiting for an autopsy. It was a high-resolution scan I had taken before leaving the cottage, magnified now on Jonah's dual monitors. To the untrained eye, it looked official. It had the standard layout of an Oregon quitclaim deed, the requisite legal description of the property, and the seal of the county clerk. But Jonah and I were not looking at the document as a whole. We were dissecting it, pixel by pixel. Look at the notary stamp, Jonah said, leaning in and tapping the screen with a pen. Jennifer L. Pringle, commission number 94221. I consulted the spreadsheet I had open on my laptop. I ran her commission number through the Secretary of State's database this morning. She is active, but her commission expires in 3 weeks. That usually means someone who is checking out of the profession, or someone who doesn't care about the long-term consequences. Dig deeper, Jonah instructed. Look at the business address registered to the stamp. I typed the address into a mapping service, 459 Industrial Way, Suite B. The satellite view loaded, revealing a desolate strip mall on the outskirts of Portland. I switched to Street View. Suite B was not a law office. It was not a bank. It was a check cashing facility that shared a wall with a vape shop. A check cashing place, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. Sloan didn't hire a mobile notary service. She went to a strip mall. And look at the reviews, Jonah said, sliding a printout across the desk. 3 complaints in the last 6 months for improper notarization and absent parties. Jennifer Pringle has a habit of stamping documents without all the signatories present. That is a Class C felony in this state. We shifted our attention to the signature. My signature. It was a good attempt. I had to give them credit for that. They had likely practiced tracing it from old birthday cards or checks I had written to them over the years. But forgery is an art of confidence, and fear leaves a tremor. Jonah zoomed in on the capital M. "See that?" he asked. "Right at the peak of the letter, there is a microscopic pool of ink. That is called a hesitation mark. A person signing their own name writes in a fluid, muscle memory motion. A forger pauses, just for a millisecond, to check their spacing. That dot is where the pen rested while they thought about the next curve." He scrolled to the D. "And here, the loop is too tight. You write with a wider, more open loop. We have 10 years of your employment contracts to prove it." "So we have them," I said, feeling a surge of vindication. "We can file a police report right now. Fraud, forgery, theft by deception." Jonah sat back, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. We could walk into the police station today, but think about what happens next. The police open a file. They call your mother. Diane cries. She says it was a misunderstanding, a family dispute. The police hate civil matters disguised as crimes. They might stall. And meanwhile, the bar investigation against you continues. "So we wait?" "We wait," Jonah confirmed. "If we strike now, they claim it was a mistake. If we let them get comfortable, they will use this deed. They will try to take out a loan against the house. They will try to list it for sale. The moment they use a fraudulent document to obtain financial gain, it stops being a family dispute and becomes aggravated white-collar crime. We need them to commit fully." I understood. It was the hardest part of the compliance world. Watching a violation happen and doing nothing, just so you could capture the full scope of the damage. I had to let them steal my house so I could prove they were thieves. The next 3 days were a masterclass in isolation. Stonebridge Compliance Group sent me an official email on Tuesday morning. The subject line was, "Change in work status." "Dear Madeline, in light of the pending investigation by the Oregon State Bar and the sensitivity of our client data, we are transitioning you to a remote operational status effective immediately. Your access to the central server has been restricted. You will be assigned administrative tasks that do not require client confidentiality clearance. This is a temporary measure pending the verification of the allegations." It was a polite way of saying I was radioactive. I was sent spreadsheets to format, mindless work that an intern could do. I sat in my apartment, formatting columns and rows, knowing that my career was hanging by a single, fraying thread. If the bar ruled against me, Stonebridge would cut that thread without a second thought. My phone rang on Wednesday evening. It was Diane. I stared at the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but Jonah's advice echoed in my head. Document everything. I answered on the third ring. "Hello, Mom?" "Maddie," she breathed, her voice thick with performative emotion. "Oh, honey, I have been so worried. I called your office today just to see if you were okay. And the receptionist said you were working remotely? Is everything all right?" She knew. Of course she knew. She was likely the one who had encouraged Calvin to send the email that got me suspended. She was calling to check the damage. "I am fine, Mom. Just a policy change." I lied smoothly. "Well, listen," she said, her tone shifting to that confidential whisper she used when she wanted to recruit me into a conspiracy. "I have been talking to Sloane. She is feeling terrible about how things went down on Sunday. We all are. We just want this to be over. Maddie, we want to be a family again." "I would like that too," I said, my voice flat. "Good, because Sloane had an idea. If you just sign a simple waiver, just a little paper saying you agree with the transfer and that you won't contest the deed, we can put all this ugliness behind us. Calvin says if we have that waiver, he can probably make some calls and get that nasty bar complaint withdrawn. He knows people." The bribe was so naked it was almost obscene. "Sign the waiver, and we will stop trying to get you disbarred." "Mom," I said, pausing to ensure my voice sounded tired. beaten. "I can't sign anything right now. The bar is watching me. If I sign legal documents, they might think I'm practicing again. I have to be careful." "But this isn't legal work," she insisted, her desperation leaking through. "It is just a family agreement. Don't be stubborn. Maddie, think about your job. Do you really want to lose everything just because of pride?" "I am not being stubborn. I am being compliant," I said. "Moms, please, just let me work with the process. I have to do what the bar asks." I hung up before she could argue. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back the rage. She didn't care that I might lose my license. She used the threat of it as a bargaining chip. I spent the rest of the evening working on my defense portfolio. I organized the metadata from the photos. I cross-referenced the dates. I was building a timeline that was impenetrable. At 11 o'clock at night, my laptop pinged with a notification. I had my personal email open in one tab and my Project Firewall secure drive in another. The email was from an address I recognized. C. Carlson, consulting@gmail.com. It was Calvin's old business email, the one he used for his freelance consulting gigs that never seemed to go anywhere. The subject line was, "Final draft, revisions for submission." My heart stopped. I clicked on it. The body of the email was empty. There was only an attachment, a Word document titled "Ara Complaint MM Clark Va 4.docx." I stared at it. Why did I have this? I looked at the to field. It was addressed to sloanecarlson@yahoo.com. And then I looked at the autofill. In Calvin's contact list, Sloane and Suncrest, my old high school email address that I hadn't used in years but was still in his address book, must have been next to each other, or perhaps he had typed S and clicked too fast. Or maybe, just maybe, the universe was finally balancing the scales. He had meant to send the draft to Sloane for review. He had accidentally copied my old email address, which forwarded automatically to my current one. I didn't breathe. I moved the cursor and downloaded the attachment. I didn't open it in Word. I opened it in a forensic metadata viewer I used for work. The document opened. It was the full text of the anonymous complaint filed against me. The language was identical to what Mr. Henderson had read in the hearing. Predatory behavior, unauthorized practice. But the text wasn't what mattered. I navigated to the Properties tab. Author, Calvin Carlson. Company, Carlson Consulting. Created, October 14th, 10:30 a.m. Last modified, Calvin Carlson. Total editing time, 4 hours and 12 minutes. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark apartment. This was it. This was the smoking gun. They had filed the complaint as a concerned citizen. They had sworn in affidavits that they were merely victims corroborating an external report, but the metadata proved that Calvin wrote it. He wrote it on the morning after they kicked me out. He spent 4 hours crafting the lies that were meant to destroy me. And by sending it to me, even accidentally, he had broken the chain of anonymity. I didn't cheer. I didn't call Jonah. Not yet. I took a screenshot of the email header. I took a screenshot of the metadata. I saved the file in 3 different locations. Then I opened a new document in my bar complaint, prep folder. I titled it, Exhibit Z, Proof of Malicious Conspiracy. I imagined Calvin sitting in his study right now, swirling a glass of scotch, thinking he was the smartest man in the room. He probably didn't even check his sent folder. He thought I was crying in my apartment, terrified of the vague, faceless state bar monster he had unleashed. He didn't know that he had just handed the monster a leash, and he had handed the other end to me. I closed the laptop. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of absolute calm. They were not just greedy relatives anymore. They were incompetent criminals. And tomorrow, I was going to introduce them to the consequences of their own arrogance. The rumble of the moving truck engine at 7 o'clock in the morning was not a sound of arrival. It was a sound of erasure. It vibrated through the floorboards of the cottage, rattling the cups in the cupboard, announcing that the timeline for my displacement had been moved up. I stood in the hallway, sipping a glass of water, watching through the side window as the massive white box truck backed into the gravel drive, crushing the azaleas my grandfather had planted 30 years ago. Sloane stepped out of her car, followed by Diane. My sister was dressed for supervision, wearing a stiff denim jacket and designer sunglasses, holding a clipboard like a weapon. She gestured sharply to the two men in the truck cab, pointing at the front porch. They were burly men, wearing uniforms that said "Speedy Relocations," looking tired and indifferent to the family drama they were about to facilitate. Diane stood by the hood of the car, her arms crossed. She looked solemn, her face set in a mask of tragic necessity. To anyone watching from the neighbors' houses, she looked like a mother engaging in tough love, but I saw the glitter in her eyes. It was the thrill of acquisition. She believed that by noon, this house would be empty of me and full of their potential profit. I heard heavy boots on the porch steps. Then, a pounding on the door. "Maddie, open up!" Sloane's voice was muffled by the wood but sharp with authority. "The guys are on the clock. Don't make this difficult." I took a deep breath. I looked at the two men standing in my living room. Out of sight of the window, Jonah straightened his tie. Next to him was Mr. Sterling, a man with the posture of a bridge piling and the expression of a tax audit. He held a leather portfolio against his chest. "Ready?" Jonah asked softly. "Ready," I said. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Sloane was mid-sentence, her mouth open to shout again. She froze. The two movers behind her, one holding a dolly and the other a stack of packing blankets, stopped in their tracks. They expected to see a crying girl surrounded by boxes. Instead, they saw me, calm and empty-handed, flanked by two men in suits. "What is this?" Sloane snapped, her eyes darting from Jonah to Mr. Sterling. "Who are these people? I told you to pack, not throw a party." "We are not here to party, Ms. Clark," Jonah said, his voice projecting clearly over the idling noise of the truck. "And you are not here to move anything." Sloane laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Excuse me? This is my house. I have the deed, I have the keys, and I have a contract with these movers. Step aside, or I will have you removed for trespassing." She stepped forward, trying to physically bully her way into the threshold. Mr. Sterling stepped out, blocking her path with a simple, fluid motion. He didn't touch her. He just occupied the space she wanted to be in. "Ms. Clark," he said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I am a senior compliance officer with the Waverly Point County Recorder's Office. I am here to serve you with a notice of administrative stay regarding the property at 42 Seaview Lane." Sloane blinked. "A what?" "A stay," Sterling repeated. He pulled a document from his portfolio and handed it to her. It was stamped with a large, bold seal. "We received an affidavit regarding irregular notarization and potential fraud in the filing of the quitclaim deed dated October 14th. Until an investigation is conducted into the validity of the signatures and the notary commission used, the title transfer has been suspended. The property remains in the name of the estate of Thomas Clark." Sloane stared at the paper. Her hands began to shake, crumpling the edges of the document. "This is bullshit. The deed is recorded. I saw the stamp. You can't just suspend a sale." "We can when the notary used is a mobile service operating out of a check-cashing facility with 3 prior sanctions for fraud," Jonah interjected smoothly. "And when the signature on the deed fails a basic forensic visual analysis compared to the executor's known hand." Behind Sloane, the movers exchanged a look. The one with the dolly lowered it to the ground. "Hey, lady," the mover said, his voice rough. "You said this was a clean job. Moving a sister out. You didn't say nothing about cops or fraud." "He is not a cop," Sloane shrieked, spinning around. "He is a bureaucrat, and she is a liar. Just get in there and start moving the furniture. I am paying you double." "We don't touch probate disputes," the mover said, shaking his head. "Company policy. If the title is flagged, we walk. I am not getting my truck impounded for aiding a burglary." "It is not a burglary," Diane yelled from the driveway, finally rushing forward. Her carefully constructed mask of dignity was slipping. "We are the family. It is our house. Maddie, tell them to stop this nonsense." I looked at my mother. She looked frantic, her eyes darting around as if searching for Calvin to come save them. But Calvin wasn't there. He was safe in his home office, probably checking his email, waiting for the all-clear text. He had sent the women to do the dirty work so his hands would remain clean if things went wrong. "I can't tell them that, Mom," I said calmly, "because it isn't your house. Mr. Sterling just confirmed that." The movers didn't wait for permission. They turned around, walked back to the truck, and slammed the back gate shut. The metallic clang echoed like a gunshot. The driver climbed into the cab, revved the engine, and began to back out of the driveway. Sloane watched them go, her face turning a blotchy red. She spun back to me, her composure completely shattered. She realized the physical invasion had failed. The truck was gone. The muscle was gone. All she had left was her venom. "You think you are so smart," she hissed, stepping up to the bottom step of the porch. "You think calling a county clerk is going to save you? You are playing a dangerous game, Maddie. You are poking the bear." "I am just following the law." "Sloane," I said, "isn't that what you always tell me to do?" "The law?" she spat. "You don't know the first thing about the law. You are a glorified secretary, and you know what happens to secretaries who pretend to be lawyers? They get fired, they get blacklisted." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper that she thought Jonah couldn't hear. "You might keep the house for another week, but the bar investigation is already moving. Calvin put in a call this morning. They are going to subpoena your work emails. They are going to find every little mistake you ever made. If you don't drop this, if you don't let the movers come back tomorrow, you are going to lose your job at Stonebridge. You will be unhireable. You will be nothing." It was the threat I had been waiting for. It was the direct link. I looked at her, letting a small, cold smile touch my lips. I didn't look at Jonah, but I knew he was witnessing every syllable. I didn't look at Mr. Sterling, but I knew he was taking mental notes. "So that is the trade?" I asked clearly. "If I give you the house, the bar complaint stops? If I resist, you destroy my career?" "Exactly," Ghosn said, her arrogance blinding her to the trap. "Finally, you get it. The house for your job. That is the deal. Take it or leave it." The silence that followed was heavy. The ocean wind whipped Sloane's hair across her face, but she didn't brush it away. She just stared at me, waiting for me to fold. I looked her dead in the eye. "Thank you, Sloane," I said. "For what?" she sneered. "For confirming that the bar complaint isn't about ethics," I said, my voice dropping to a tone of absolute finality. "It is about extortion. You just admitted on the record, in front of a court officer and an attorney, that you are using a state disciplinary process to leverage a private asset transfer." Sloane's eyes widened. She flicked her gaze to Mr. Sterling, who was writing something in his notebook. She looked at Jonah, who was looking at her with the pity one reserves for a roadkill. I didn't mean," she stammered, stepping back. "You meant exactly what you said," I said, "and now we have the witness testimony to prove it." I stepped back and started to close the door. "Get off my porch, Sloane, and tell Calvin his consulting skills need work." I shut the door before she could answer. I threw the deadbolt. Outside, I heard Sloane screaming something incoherent, then the sound of her car door slamming. I leaned against the wood of the door, my legs trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. Jonah smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. "That," Jonah said, "was a textbook admission of abuse of process. Mr. Sterling, did you catch that?" "Every word," Sterling said, closing his portfolio. "I believe Judge Ward will find that conversation very illuminating." I walked to the window and watched them leave. Diane was in the passenger seat, looking pale and terrified. Sloane was driving aggressively, kicking up gravel. They were retreating, but they didn't know they were running straight into the wall I had built. They had brought a truck to take my furniture, but they had left behind the one thing I needed to bury them: the truth. The final disciplinary hearing felt less like a trial and more like a surgical procedure where the patient was awake and the anesthetic had failed. The conference room was the same as before, but the air was different. It was heavier. Mr. Henderson, the bar counsel, had brought an assistant this time, and his stack of files had grown higher. Diane and Sloane sat in the back row against the wall, dressed in muted colors, playing the role of the aggrieved family to perfection. Calvin was absent, of course. He remained the invisible hand, winding the clockwork toys and sending them marching into traffic. Judge Elena Ward entered precisely at 9 o'clock. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She opened her laptop, adjusted her glasses, and looked at Henderson. "Counsel," she said, her voice crisp, "we are here to make a final determination on the fitness of Ms. Clark to continue her employment in the legal sector. You indicated you have new evidence that speaks to the core of the unauthorized practice of law allegation." "We do, Your Honor," Henderson said, standing up with a confidence that made the hair on my arms stand up. "We have obtained a digital recording. It was provided by the family late last night. It captures a conversation between the respondent, Ms. Clark, and her mother, Diane Clark. In this recording, Ms. Clark explicitly advises her mother on how to hide assets from the state and offers to draft the necessary instruments to circumvent probate." My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at Jonah. His face remained impassive, but I saw his jaw tighten. I had never had such a conversation. "Play it," Judge Ward ordered. Henderson placed a small Bluetooth speaker on the mahogany table. He pressed play. Static filled the room. Followed by my voice, it was unmistakably me. "You need to move the money now. If we structure it correctly, the state won't see a dime. I can write up the papers. It is just a matter of knowing which forms to file to make the liability disappear." The audio cut off. Silence stretched across the room. Diane dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Sloane looked at the floor, shaking her head in mock disappointment. It sounded damning. To anyone in that room, it sounded like I was coaching my mother on tax evasion and fraud. "That is my voice," I said, standing up before Jonah could stop me. "But I never said those sentences in that order." "Ms. Clark," Judge Ward warned, "you will have your turn." "I would like to respond now." "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "Because if that is the best evidence they have, then they have just proven my case for me." Jonah stood up. "Your Honor, we request the raw file. We also request permission to play a comparison audio from Ms. Clark's cloud backups." Judge Ward nodded. "Proceed." I opened my laptop. I knew exactly where those sentences came from. My mind raced through the catalog of my memories, indexing every conversation I had ever had with my mother about money. "The first part," I said, typing furiously to pull up the file. "You need to move the money now. That is from a voicemail I left my mother 3 years ago when her bank notified her of a phishing attempt on her checking account." I played the original file. "Mom, pick up. The bank called. You need to move the money now before the hackers drain the account." "The second part," I continued, switching to a video file from a Christmas party 2 years prior. "If we structure it correctly, the state won't see a dime. That was a discussion about a charitable donation to the local animal shelter, which is tax deductible." I played the video. "It is a great charity. Mom, if we structure it correctly, the state won't see a dime of tax on it, and the dogs get everything." "And the last part," I said, my voice rising. "I can write up the papers. That was from when I offered to help Sloane edit her college admission essay." I looked at Henderson. "This recording is a splice. It is a digital Frankenstein made of years of innocent conversations, stitched together to frame me, and I have the call logs and the metadata to prove the original contexts." I slid the flash drive containing the original files across the table. Henderson looked at the drive, then back at his notes. He looked pale. He turned to look at Diane and Sloane. Sloane stopped looking at the floor and started staring daggers at the back of Henderson's head. "Mr. Henderson," Judge Ward said, her voice dangerously low, Did you verify the integrity of this audio before submitting it to this tribunal? It was submitted under a sworn statement of authenticity by Ms. Sloane Clark. Henderson stammered. I see, Judge Ward said. She didn't look at Sloane. She looked at me. Do you have anything else to submit, Ms. Clark? Yes, Your Honor, I said. I have the origin of the complaint itself. Jonah handed the next document to the judge. It was the screenshot of the email Calvin had accidentally sent to me, the one titled Bar Complaint Revision. The complaint was filed anonymously, Jonah stated, but this email shows that it was authored, edited, and revised by Calvin Carlson, the respondent's stepfather. The metadata shows he spent 4 hours drafting it on the morning of October 14th. That is the day after the family evicted Ms. Clark from her home. Judge Ward looked at the document. She looked at the timestamp. And finally, Jonah said, dropping the last piece of paper like a heavy stone, we have the testimony of Mr. Arthur Sterling, a county official. He was present 2 days ago when Ms. Sloane Clark explicitly told my client, if you give us the house, the bar complaint stops. The room felt like it was shrinking. The air was sucked out of it. The anonymous citizen defense was dead. The concerned family narrative was dead. All that was left was the naked machinery of extortion. Judge Ward closed the folder. She took off her glasses and set them on the table. She swiveled her chair to face the back of the room. Mrs. Diane Clark, Ms. Sloane Clark, please approach the table. They hesitated. Sloane stood up first, defiant. Diane followed, looking like she might faint. They took the seats opposite me. You filed a complaint alleging that this woman, Judge Ward pointed a pen at me, was a danger to the public and a disgrace to the legal profession. You swore affidavits that she was manipulating you. She was, Diane whispered, her voice trembling. She is always so controlling. She thinks she knows everything just because she works in the city. We were just trying to protect the family legacy. Protect the legacy, Judge Ward repeated. Is that why you offered to withdraw this complaint if she signed a waiver for the house? We just wanted peace, Diane said, tears spilling over. She is so stubborn. She was making it so hard. We thought if she didn't have the job distracting her, she would understand that family comes first. She is tearing us apart. Stop, Judge Ward said. It wasn't a shout, but it stopped Diane mid-sob. I am looking at a timeline, the judge continued. Eviction on Sunday. Complaint drafted Monday morning. Job suspension Monday afternoon. Settlement offer Tuesday. Extortion attempt witnessed by a county official on Thursday. This does not look like a family being torn apart. Mrs. Clark, it looks like a strategic campaign to leverage a regulatory body to bypass probate court. Sloane slammed her hand on the table. You don't understand. The house is ours. She is the one stealing it. She is holding it hostage with her little legal tricks. We have the deed. It is in my name. I watched Sloane. She had just walked right off the cliff. Judge Ward turned her eyes to Sloane. They were cold, hard, and absolutely terrifying. I am glad you brought up the deed, Judge Ward said. She reached into her own briefcase, which had been sitting by her feet. She pulled out a document I had not given her. It was a certified copy of the deed Sloane had filed. After the preliminary hearing, Judge Ward said, her voice conversational but deadly, I found myself curious about this property dispute, so I exercised my authority to request the file from the Waverly Point County Recorder. She slid the document to the center of the table. I have seen many deeds in my 40 years in law, Judge Ward said, but this one is special. It features the stamp of a notary, Jennifer Pringle, who surrendered her commission 3 days ago in exchange for immunity in an unrelated fraud investigation. Diane gasped. Sloane went rigid. And Judge Ward continued, I took the liberty of comparing the signature on this deed to the signature on Ms. Clark's bar registration forms. She looked at Sloane. It is a clumsy forgery. Ms. Clark, the loop on the D is wrong. The spacing is hesitant. It looks like it was signed by someone trying very hard to be someone else. That is a lie, Sloane whispered, but the color had drained from her face. It is a felony, Judge Ward corrected. The word hung in the air. Felony. Mr. Henderson, the bar counsel, was frantically packing his bag. He wanted no part of this. He had realized he was the weapon in a crime, not the prosecutor of one. This hearing was convened to determine if Madeline Clark engaged in the unauthorized practice of law, Judge Ward said, her voice ringing with authority. I find that she has not. Her actions were those of a diligent executor and a compliant professional. She stood up. However, this hearing has uncovered evidence of a much more serious transgression. We have evidence of perjury in the affidavit submitted to this body. We have evidence of extortion, and we have prima facie evidence of real estate fraud and forgery. She looked at Diane and Sloane, who were now clinging to each other, not out of love, but out of terror. This is no longer a disciplinary matter, Judge Ward declared. I am dismissing the complaint against Ms. Clark with prejudice. Furthermore, I am forwarding the entire transcript of this hearing, along with the audio files, the email metadata, and the fraudulent deed, to the district attorney's office. No, Diane wailed. No, please. It was just a misunderstanding. We are a family. You should have thought of that before you tried to destroy your daughter's life to steal a cottage, Judge Ward said. Mr. Henderson, escort these women out and ensure the marshals are waiting in the lobby to take their statements. I don't want them leaving the building. I sat frozen in my chair. It was over. It wasn't just that I had won. It was that they had lost everything. They had come for my job, and in doing so, they had handed me the evidence to put them in handcuffs. Sloane looked at me as she stood up. Her arrogance was gone. Her rage was gone. There was only fear. Maddie, she whispered, fix this, please. I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had kicked me out of my grandfather's house. I looked at the mother who had sided with the lie. I can't, I said softly. I am not a lawyer. Sloane, remember? I watched them being led out of the room. The door closed. The silence returned. Jonah leaned over and whispered, That went well? I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for a month. Is it over? I asked. The bar complaint is over, Jonah said. But the criminal case is just starting, and Calvin is going to be very surprised when the police show up at his consulting office. I stood up and gathered my files. I felt light, the weight of their expectations, their judgments, their greed. It was all gone. Let's go, I said. I have a house to unlock. Judge Ward did not simply dismiss the case. She dismantled it with the precision of a forensic pathologist conducting an autopsy on a still-breathing lie. The room was silent, save for the hum of the ventilation system and the scratching of the stenographer's machine, recording the destruction of my family's narrative line by line. The purpose of the state bar, Judge Ward began, looking over her reading glasses at Diane and Sloane, is to protect the public from incompetent or predatory legal representation. It is not designed to be a bludgeon for family squabbles, nor is it a tool to extort property rights from lawful heirs. She picked up the final decision draft, her voice resonating with a quiet, terrifying authority. The evidence presented shows that Madeline Clark did not represent clients. She did not collect fees. She did not hold herself out as an attorney to the public. Her actions were confined strictly to the administration of her own family's estate and the performance of her duties as a legal assistant under proper supervision. Therefore, the allegation of the unauthorized practice of law is unfounded. She paused, letting the relief wash over me, but she was not finished. However, she continued, her gaze hardening, the complaint itself carries the distinct markers of malicious abuse of process. The timing of the filing, coinciding exactly with an eviction demand, and the subsequent settlement offer witnessed by a county official indicates that this regulatory body was used as a weapon of coercion. This court finds that the primary intent of the complainants was not public protection, but private gain. It was a total vindication, but Jonah was not done. He stood up, clearing his throat to draw the room's attention one last time. Your Honor, if I may, Jonah said, his voice calm. There is one final matter regarding the property itself. The complainants have rested their entire justification on the claim that they possess a recorded deed transferring the house to Sloane Clark, thereby making my client a trespasser. We do, Sloane interrupted, her voice shrill and desperate. It is recorded. You saw the stamp. Even if the notary was problematic, the filing is real. I am the owner of record. Jonah turned to me. He gave a barely perceptible nod. This was the card we had been holding since the very first day I walked into his office, the quiet legal structure we had built while they were busy making noise. Actually, you are not, Jonah said. He pulled a single, blue-backed document from his briefcase. On October 8th, 4 days before the dinner where you attempted to force a power of attorney on my client, and 6 days before you filed your fraudulent quitclaim deed, Ms. Clark filed an affidavit of heirship and a notice of lis pendens with the Waverly Point County Recorder. Sloane's mouth opened, but no sound came out. This filing, Jonah explained, handing the certified copy to the judge, placed the world on constructive notice that the property was subject to a probate dispute. Under Oregon law, any subsequent transfer of title, including your forged deed, is void ab initio if it conflicts with the recorded interest of the estate executor. Your deed is not just a forgery, Ms. Clark, it is a nullity. It was worthless the moment you paid that check-cashing notary to stamp it. The realization hit Sloane like a physical blow. She had committed a felony for nothing. She had destroyed her relationship with me, exposed herself to criminal liability, and dragged our mother into a courtroom, all for a piece of paper that had zero legal power from the very start. Diane stood up, her face flushed with a mix of humiliation and rage. She looked at me, not with the eyes of a mother, but with the eyes of a creditor who realizes the debt will never be paid. You ungrateful child, she screamed, her voice cracking. After everything we did for you, we gave you a home, we raised you, and this is how you repay us? By dragging us through the mud? By trying to send your sister to jail? You are heartless. Madeline, you are absolutely cold. The outburst echoed off the walls. In any other setting, at any family gathering in the past, this would have been the moment I crumbled. This was the moment I would have apologized, begged for forgiveness, and given them whatever they wanted just to stop the screaming. But today, the silence in the room was not one of awkwardness. It was one of judgment. The judge, the bailiff, the stenographer, and even Mr. Henderson looked at Diane with undisguised pity and disgust. They did not see a victim. They saw a manipulator losing her grip. Order, Judge Ward said, not shouting, but with a tone that cut through Diane's hysterics like a knife. Mrs. Clark, sit down. Your definition of family loyalty appears to be synonymous with complicity and fraud. That definition does not hold weight in this court. Diane collapsed back into her chair, sobbing into her hands, but it was Sloane who broke. She looked at the deed on the table, the evidence of her crime. She looked at the judge, who was forwarding her file to the district attorney, and then she looked at the empty chair next to her where Calvin should have been. It wasn't my idea, Sloane sobbed, the tears finally real. She turned to the room, pleading with the audience of strangers. It was Calvin. He told me which notary to go to. He drafted the complaint. He said we had to scare her. He said Maddie was weak and she would fold. He did all of it. And yet, Judge Ward said dryly, Mr. Carlson is not here to answer for it, is he? He wasn't Calvin, the architect of the entire scheme. The man who had whispered poison into their ears for weeks had vanished. The metadata had exposed him. His signature was on the digital files. But the man himself had retreated into the shadows the moment the light became too bright. He was a coward who set traps, but refused to check them. Judge Ward banged her gavel once, a sharp, final sound. This hearing is adjourned. The record is sealed for the bar complaint, but the evidence of criminal conduct is preserved for the prosecutor. Ms. Clark, you are free to go, and you leave with your professional reputation intact. I walked out of the conference room. I did not look back at my mother, who was weeping into a tissue. I did not look back at Sloane, who was arguing with Mr. Henderson about who would pay for her criminal defense lawyer. I walked out into the cool, gray afternoon of the Pacific Northwest. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email from Marcus at Stonebridge Compliance Group. Subject: Reinstatement and Apology. Dear Maddie, we have received the preliminary summary from your counsel. Please accept this formal apology on behalf of the partners. Your suspension is lifted effective immediately. We would like to discuss a promotion to Senior Compliance Analyst upon your return, as your handling of this regulatory matter demonstrates exactly the kind of rigorous adherence to protocol we value. Take the rest of the week off. I deleted the email. I would reply later. I would take the promotion later. Right now, I just needed to breathe. Jonah walked up beside me on the courthouse steps. He lit a cigarette, a habit I hadn't seen him indulge in until now. You know, he said, exhaling a plume of smoke, most people would be celebrating. You just beat a bar complaint, saved your inheritance, and exposed a felony ring. You don't look happy. I am not happy, Jonah, I said, watching the traffic move sluggishly on the wet street. I am just light. Light is good, he said. They aren't crying in there because they lost the house, I said, the realization settling over me with absolute clarity. They have houses. They have money. They are crying because for the first time in 29 years, I told them no, and I made it stick. They are mourning the death of their control over me. That is the only death that matters in a case like this, Jonah said. He clapped me on the shoulder. Go home, Maddie, the real one. I drove back to Waverly Point. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the coastal highway. When I pulled into the driveway of the cottage, there was no moving truck. There was no black SUV. The tire tracks from their invasion were still visible in the gravel, but the wind was already beginning to smooth them away. I walked up the porch steps. I unlocked the door. The house smelled of cedar and sea salt. It was quiet. It was mine. I didn't pour a glass of wine. I didn't turn on music. I walked to the study, the scene of the crime where Sloane had taken that photo. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. I placed the certified copy of the affidavit of heirship inside. I placed the USB drive with the metadata inside. I placed the letter from the state bar inside. I closed the drawer. It didn't stick this time. It slid shut with a smooth, satisfying click. My family would survive. Calvin would likely spend his retirement money on lawyers to stay out of prison. Sloane would get probation, probably, and spend the rest of her life blaming me for her criminal record. Diane would play the victim to anyone who would listen at her bridge club. But they would never come back here. They would never darken this doorway again, not because of a restraining order, but because of the shame. I had seen them naked in their greed, and they could not bear to look at the witness. I walked to the bay window and looked out at the Pacific Ocean, vast and indifferent and relentless. I used to think revenge meant making people scream. I used to think it meant explosions and public humiliations. But standing there, in the silence of a house that was finally, legally, and spiritually safe, I realized I was wrong. Revenge is just the act of correcting the record. It is refusing to accept the version of reality where you are the victim. I locked the window. I turned off the lamp. The boundary was set. It didn't need to scream. It just needed to stand there, immovable, like the cliffs against the tide. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the twisted hallways of family betrayal and legal retribution, and I am so glad you stayed with Maddie until the final verdict. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a quiet room like Maddie's cottage, or maybe on your commute through a busy city? Please leave a comment down below and let me know your location and what you thought of Maddie's quiet revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to support the work, and smash the hype button so this video can be discovered by more people who need a little justice in their lives. Until next time, stay safe and keep your boundaries strong.